You're back right here on the Gill Athletics Connections podcast. I am so happy that you pressed play on today's episode. I'm humbled to be your host, Mike Cunningham, the National Business Development Manager here at Gill Athletics, and you have pressed play on the Connections podcast, where we uplift and honor coaches from around the world. It's really quite fantastic, some of the coaches we've had here on the show in the past. And today is no different. We're going to give you, this is going to be probably, I'm going to try to predict this, the most eclectic interview that we've had on the show. Our guest today has done, I don't know if it all is the right response, but has certainly done a lot. When we talk about the unsung heroes of track and field, meaning people, we obviously know the athletes and they're amazing. And of course we know the coaches and love them. And that's what our entire show here is, to uplift and honor them. There are other people out there, from manufacturers like us at Gill Athletics, our dealer network that's out there, people who make equipment, sell equipment, coach, masters athletes. All of that and more is what's going to be in today's guest. So let's get to it. Help me welcome, from Lane Community College and our great friends and partners at OnTrack and Field out in California, help me welcome the wise, the wonderful Mr. Dan West. Dan, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Good morning. Thank you.
It is morning. That's right. Thanks for joining us here today, man. I'm super excited. You and I have known each other. I probably met you fairly early in my career here, because I remember going out to Oregon for Olympic trials, and that's probably actually when I first met you. And I've just now known you as Mr. Oregon since that day.
Yeah. It's been quite a run, actually, with my association with Gill.
Absolutely. We appreciate it. That's why we wanted to have you on the show, not only because everything I just described, coaching, manufacturing, dealership, masters athlete, that is one big ball of Dan West. You have so many different roles and fun passions that you have, and I'm so excited to be able to explore those today.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Well, Dan, typically my first question for a coach on the podcast here is, somewhere in your life, coaching had to change in your mind. It had to go from something that was done to you, Dan, go throw this, go jump this, etc., to, oh, wait a minute, I could be the coach. I could actually, that could be a career for me. I'm going to change it up for you here a little bit. Talk to us. Where does track and field start for you?
Well, when I was, so my dad was, and parents were musicians and not military, but they still moved. We moved all over the place. And so when I started 5th grade, we moved to Powers, Oregon. And that's a little town not very far from Coos Bay, where famous Prefontaine came from. So track was kind of happening, and it was an exciting, because it was a real backward community, meaning way away from everything. And we moved into this cool house right above a river, to look down and see salmon swimming. It was about 50 feet down to the river, clear, this pool right down below, and split level home, and exploring. We were out just outside the town. It was really exciting. But at Christmas, it started to rain, snow melted, the river came all the way up to the house.
Oh,
and big, huge old growth Doug fir were bumping into the house from the flood.
oh, wow.
So we had to move right away. And we went into town, and we actually moved into the worst house we'd ever lived in or ever did live in. It's almost a shack. But the cool thing was, there was an alley right behind it, and there's that alley was an open lot. And then that lot was a pile of sawdust, two 2x4s with nails in them for standards, and a wooden box and a steel vaulting pole just laying there.
Just laying there.
Just like, yeah, it was just, I have later found out that Marty Steller built that for the kids. So kids just vaulted. So I just started pole vaulting with the kids.
Did you have any idea what vaulting was before?
No, nothing. No, I'd never heard of it. Had no concept, but that's what the kids were doing. And so I started vaulting. And at Powers, track started at 6th grade, and I was in the 5th grade. So I kept asking the coach, can I do track? Can I do this? And he said, not until you're in 6th grade. And I kept bugging him until finally he said, Dan, if you clear 6 feet, you can go to this big, there was a county meet in Coos Bay. And so every night and I finally cleared 6 feet. So he let me go. And I have, it's funny, I have no memory of myself at that meet. But what my memory is this big kid, probably an 8th grader, right?
Right.
He's a monster guy. And he came running down the runway, and the bar seemed like it was a mile high, 10 or 11 feet, maybe 12,
Mhm.
maybe.
Mhm.
And he had a bamboo pole and it bent a little bit. And he swung up and flew over that bar, and that was it. So from that time on, it's been pole vault for me. So track, I've learned to love track, and I've coached other events, but for me, it's always been the pole vault, obviously. So I've vaulted since that day. Every year I've cleared a crossbar now, 58 years in a
Wow.
row. I've cleared a crossbar every year for 58 years. And so that just started my love affair with the vault. And unfortunately, well, fortunately for me, I had bad facilities and bad coaches when I had them all the way through college. Um, and I never really accomplished in the vault world what I wanted to. But it gave me this drive to make sure that especially the not knowing what to do
Mhm.
through high school and college, and I can elaborate later, but just to answer the question,
Mhm.
that drove me to want to become a coach, so no other kid would ever have to go through what I did, both technically, training, but also facilities and equipment.
Mhm.
All those things kept me from jumping what I thought I could have jumped.
You know,
So that's kind of what got me into coaching.
you can call it fate, serendipity, luck, but that river coming up to your house, because if
That
not, now a guy like you might have still found the vault somewhere, but it's quite possible that if that doesn't happen and you guys are living in an idyllic area and it's beautiful and you become a woodsman, a park
right,
ranger or something
right,
because where you're at.
right.
But instead that happens, it forces you to move. And then lo and behold, there is this, I got the, what is it? If you build it, they will come. I got the
Yeah, right.
Iowa cornfield baseball field.
There you
Like you
go.
look over and you're like, what is, I could just see you kind of like this little, kid, 5th grader curiosity of like, well, why are those poles standing there? What's that box? What's that? I don't get this. And then you see the first kid do it and you're like, oh, wait a minute. Well, that looks fun. Every little kid,
Right,
I think every
right.
little kid would love pole vaulting if they were introduced to it at that age. And then that becomes a lifetime for you of career and passion, both as athlete, coach, equipment. I mean, that really, my favorite comic books were always the origin stories. That origin story for you, Dan, is quite
Yeah,
quite
that's kind of wild.
amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then right along in there after college, I thought I was going to be. It's funny you just mentioned it, but I thought I was going to be a fisheries biologist. I was in fish and wildlife, so I went to Wyoming to work in a
Hmm.
hatchery for a couple of years, and then come back and get my master's and become a biologist. And I was in a pretty remote area of Wyoming, Pinedale. Actually, I was in Daniel. I was at the Daniel Fish Hatchery, but it's kind of southeast of Jackson. And I found out that maybe fisheries biology wasn't as cool as I thought it was going to
Hmm.
be. Um, Kind of have to do politically what the state,
Hmm.
you don't really do the many studies. So, and the first year I helped out the high school, uh, the Vultures a little bit. But that next year, I was just there for a year and 3/4. That next year, I it was a pretty lonely place, and I had to be on the hatchery a lot. I wasn't really that happy, and I got in a car accident, pretty severe. And matter of fact, came around a corner, and there was just somebody there, and I whacked
Oh.
into him. For a moment, I thought, "This is it. I'm done."
Mhm.
Right, and that just kind of woke me up. Like, hey, you know, this could happen any moment. Maybe I should do what I want to do. And so
Oh.
I contacted my senior year in college. I finally got my first time I ever actually had a coach, Rob Stark. And although he didn't know anything about the pole vault, he was a great coach, great man. And I called him up and I said, Rob, can I come back and coach for you? So
Hmm.
that summer I started training, while I was still at the hatchery for the to do a decathlon. So I thought if I'm going to coach, I should do some of the other events. So I built some hurdles, and around the hatchery grounds, he sent me a shot and a disc and a javelin, and he lent me those, and I just realized that track just called me back. But it kind of took that car accident to kind of wake me up. And so I went back to work on my master's and start coaching at Montana State. So it was those kind of two random things, because I was going off kind of in a different direction. I thought vaulting maybe was done after college, like most people do. But it just kept calling me back. I just couldn't leave it alone.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, some of us have a literal car wreck, and hopefully the most of us, because I don't want that for anybody, have that metaphysical car wreck of like, hey, what, you know, life is short at the end of the day. I should be doing something that I'm happy. And obviously you weren't very happy with the fish, you know, wildlife biologist type thing that will kill telling my son. I'm pretty sure that's what my son is going to go into. He loves fish and fishing like no
Well, I
one's
still
business.
fish,
Yeah.
and I love fish.
I
It's
say
just
he
the
is.
actual hatchery was not much fun.
Yeah, if I had to put him in a profession now, I'd be like, oh yeah, you're a park ranger, you're doing something
Yeah,
in
there you
that,
go.
yeah,
Cool,
in
cool.
that world, yeah. So I'm so glad that the car accident actually didn't do anything physically to you, like, you know, loss of life, limb, you know, something
Right.
catastrophic for that. But you mentioned you've cleared a crossbar every year for 58 years, but you were still, even through that time frame though, you were still getting out there and vaulting with or without support.
Right. Yeah. I checked in with the high school coach that first year, and asked if I could come and help the vaulters.
Mhm.
I only vaulted a couple times, but I did vault. I cleared 13.6 which was a big bar, and that, you know, so I helped the kids out, you know, at the high school level. And then that next summer, I started, like I said, I started training, and actually went back to Bozeman. I was from Montana State,
Mhm.
and competed in my first of 9 decathlons. I started doing those after college, but I never really trained. It's funny, after that, I never really trained for the decathlon. But yeah, it's you know, the vault was such an integral part, and you know, every time we moved, growing up. So I was in the 6th and 7th grade in one place. Then all of a sudden I was in 8th, 9th, and 10th in Columbus, Montana. But then I was in 3 more high schools. So I was in 4 high schools.
Wow.
So I had just kind of learned to find a way, no matter what the situation, to vault. And that's what was the one constant for me.
Did you have at each of these high schools? So now I went to the same high school, but before high school, so K through 8, I went to like 20 different schools. So I'm used to being the new guy everywhere, right?
Mhm.
And you have to
Right.
quickly find out, when you're the new guy, when you go to 4 high schools, you have to quickly find out who's my tribe and who's not my tribe. You know
Right.
who you are. Like, all right, I like track, I like vaulting. So how do I figure out where those people are, and is that even available at this high school? Did you have vaulting? Like, you said you found a way. I respect that, but was there already a vaulting program at each one of those places, or did you have to like make it yourself on some of them?
Well, there was not much vaulting at any of those high schools.
Mm.
Okay. So my freshman year, there was a 15-foot 180 pole, one pole, a 15 180. Okay. And I'm 5'3", 120 pounds. I was a little guy. So
Tree trunk.
I step pole, right?
All right.
Sophomore year, all of a sudden this community guy, he had never coached. Matter of fact, he had a bad arm from polio, Bruce, and he just wanted to help me. And he talked to head coach, and he get this, a 12-foot 120. How tiny is that? But
Right.
all of a sudden, and he did some research. There wasn't much, you know, no internet back then, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
No videos even. Very few books, but he found a book that had some drawings of Seagrin vaulting. So we kind of figured it out, and all of a sudden I was bending a pole. I was a sophomore, jumped 10.6. I had the best jump in the district. I was the only fiberglass vaulter. Everybody else was still stiff pole vaulting, straight pole. And I made 10.6. And I was like, man, I was on top of the world. I was the guy, 10-6. But as you can imagine, pretty quickly, that was not a big enough pole. I went through it. There wasn't the next pole.
Right.
Um, so that the rest of the season went very poorly,
Um,
and really bummed me out. And we moved, and the school had one pole, a 15-foot, like 170, and then still too big for me, right? And that school didn't even have a track. They just put a box in the grass. I ran on the grass, three burlap bags of foam, and I jumped 10-6 that year as a junior. Really bummed me out because I was thinking I was going to improve. I remember one day I grabbed the top of that pole and tried to bend it, and got rejected back out on the grass. So I stiff pulled, and then senior year, I went to another school, and they bought me a 12-foot 140. Damn 12-foot poles, So I jumped 11-6 on that, but then they wouldn't get me the next. I went through it. So I was stuck, and they did finally buy me a 14 140. It's a big jump.
Yeah.
But it came the day of the divisional meet, and they said, you would jump on it. And they didn't tell me what to do, change my step, change my handhold, and I know I did. And I thought, that's the end of my career. Very disappointed. But I went to Montana State, and he called me back. So I walked on. And the coach kind of looked at me like, really? But he was a really cool guy, horrible coach, an alcoholic, serious. We drank on track trips. We were the bad news bears of the track world.
Oh my.
And but that first year I had a bunch of guys to jump with, 3 other guys.
First time ever, right?
First time ever.
Yeah.
And I improved up to 13, almost made 13-6. I was starting to think, man, I can make this work. We did have to jump into a Cloud 9.
Oh yeah. Oh, the old school. Yeah. The big pillow.
Big bag and it had already been, it was already illegal to use those because they were so dangerous.
Right.
That's what we had. That's what we jumped into. But unfortunately, my sophomore year, everybody had quit. So I was by myself vaulting. And the same with my junior year, a freshman guy came in, and that helped a little bit. So, and then finally, like I said, my senior year, I actually got the first time I ever had a coach. So we had actual training. And he knew I needed to do a couple of things. Some other things happened in there. But so I ended up jumping 14-8. But I should have been, I really should have been a 16 to 17 foot vaulter. I know that now as a coach, but I was doing everything wrong. There's some other stories in there about that, but just to touch, so I just kept working because I had to vault. I just had to vault. I mean, there was no question. I had to vault, but I didn't know what I was doing, and I was very frustrated by not knowing why can't I jump with these other guys?
It's amazing. I think I'm tracking with you that, you could have should have been a 15, 16, who knows, with proper equipment, proper coaching, especially in this event, the pole vault. However, the other side of that, I'm like, wow, I'm amazed that you became a 14-8 vaulter with all of this against you as well. 1 pole a year and, no pole vault pit, no coaching. I mean, it's kind of like I see both sides. I'm like, wow, what could have been, but it's like, holy cow, you made the absolute best of it as well with what was the cards that were dealt to you. It's quite amazing.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I think that's what's propelled me to become a master's vaulter.
Yeah,
obviously, right. When I went back to Montana State, it took me probably 5 or 6. I coached there for 8 years at Montana State.
Okay.
And probably the first 5 was just me with learning how to become a coach, studying, right, going to clinics, reading. There's became more materials. This was in the 80s. This was from 80 till 87. I coached at Montana State. But I had to fix all my bad habits. I was doing everything wrong, and I had to learn how to vault. So doing that, having to transfer that late in life, right? So that, I'm 22 to 30, I'm trying to learn how to pole vault correctly. So I had to learn a lot of drills. I had to learn a lot of processes of how do you turn yourself into a good technician when you've done everything really wrong. And so, and I did, so when I was 32, the last year at Montana State, in 87, I jumped 15-5. Okay, so I hung in there, and I always wanted to jump 16, obviously, but life does get in the way as you get older, and coaching and all those other things. But I learned how to vault. I still had a couple of technical flaws, I thought, that I learned later when I came out here to Eugene. But the point I'm trying to make is that that really helped me in coaching,
Well,
because I learned for myself and how hard it is to change. So I understand
right.
that with
Oh, right.
athletes. See what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
the tricks and what you've got to do to become somebody that plants horribly or way under those kind of technical issues that can really stop you. I get those every year
Hmm.
with incoming freshmen. They haven't been coached correctly in high school,
Right.
so I have a step up on what does it take, you know. Plus, since I train with my athletes. Nobody does that much.
Right.
Hardly anybody. So I vault and train, becoming less and less as I get old. But my parents were musicians that taught private lessons. My dad, a trumpet player, my mom, a piano. So I grew up listening to them. No, it's like this, and they would play it correctly.
Mm.
So for me, that's what started. I'm old enough now. I don't really show things correctly, but by working out with the athletes, see, to me, it's like it's cheating, because then they'll do anything for you
All
when you're
right.
with them. So I've just always done that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the synthesis of how I came through that, which you pointed out, which is right, frustrating
Hmm.
thing that in some ways I'm thankful for. Some ways, obviously, I wish I'd had a Dan West coaching me,
Right. Exactly.
right? You know what I'm
Absolutely.
saying? But it's what taught me how to be the coach that whatever kind of coach I am today, that's what helped me get to where I'm at.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So put a pin in that working out with athletes, because I do want to ask you about that. But what I'm curious about, something that you said resonated with me about the lack of coaches that you had going through high school and college career. Some very well-meaning coaches, I'm sure, they just didn't know how to coach the vault.
right.
And then obviously, we talk about a coach drinking. There's no well-meaning there at all. So that's a person who wasn't cut out to be a coach. That's
Right,
the person, not the
right,
profession there. But that resonated with me. Same in high school. I didn't compete collegiately, but I competed in high school, and I had two sets of coaches, freshman through junior year. Then we got all new coaching staff my senior year. Love them both. Dennis Anderson was the coach my first few years. Love him. He was a shot putter for my alma mater, Troy State. So love him. But he knew throws. He didn't know running, sprinting, hurdling, nothing like that. And then John Gross, who actually was who just retired as the head coach of Jacksonville State football, took him to the national title. He was amazing. He was our football coach as well, obviously. He, again, coached us better than what Coach Anderson did, but still was not how you train a sprinter, hurdler, the events
right,
that I was in,
right,
right? But I love them to death. Like, still, John Gross is, when I see him once every 5 years, I hug him. I love him to death. Coach
right,
Anderson, I haven't seen in a long time, love him to death. Very, very well-meaning people that also had, they taught and they coached football. And to your point, mine was in the 90s. There still wasn't a lot of great coaching education readily available out there.
right,
So I don't know, even if they wanted to be better coaches, that there was a lot of resources for them. I say all that to say, I also, when I decided to get into coaching, was like, I will not let that happen to my athletes. Like, they're not going to not reach their potential because of me. It's going to be because of other things, their choices, right? So I really dug deep into coaching education, formally, as far as like QSATF and such, and also coach peer-to-peer education. I was always, I was that nerd when I was talking to a fellow coach. Well, what do you do here? Why did you do that? I was always, well,
right.
here's what we do. What do you think about that? What did you do? How was when you went back into coaching, you're at Montana State. And again, you're talking about, you're in the 80s here, still not a lot of great resources. First of all, not a lot of great resources at all. And then the ones that were out there were still extremely hard to get to: camps, clinics, videos, again, no YouTube, etc. No real magazines, Track and Field News, of course, and Track Journal or Track Coach, what they used to call it. But there's just not a lot of resources. How did you externalize that internal feeling of like, okay, I didn't get great coaching, well, I'm going to be the best coach that I can be? How did you externalize that? How did you do that?
Well, I was fortunate. There was a great track clinic every year in Washington, Ken Shannon put on. So I was, and with Rob Stark, who was the head coach my senior year, and then he was my head coach through that whole time at Montana State. and we went as a staff.
Hmm.
And actually Montana still has a great coaching clinic in the summers, adults, and so we went to that, and they would have outside speakers. I think at one point we had an assistant, women's assistant, um, and she had a friend, Robert Pollard, who was at the time was one of the top, had been one of the top vaulters, one of the few earliest, maybe the first Black guy to be a international class vaulter. And they were friends, and she talked him into coming to do a clinic on the vault and some other things. So I learned a lot there. There was some, there was a little bit more literature, obviously. And I had to study the other, I was the jumps coach, so I had to coach high jump, long jump, and triple jump. So there was a lot of carryover, obviously, with approach work and sprinting. So there was that literature. But, you know, one of the biggest things was I got fortunate. I had a couple of really good athletes. So I learned from them pretty quickly some stuff, and watched what they were doing, and kind of followed through with that. You know, before that, interestingly, so one of the mistakes I made, and I try to help athletes, I was pretty shy when I was vaulting. Wasn't sure I belonged in a certain sense. So I didn't talk. It wasn't that I didn't want to. I was just afraid to talk to the other vaulters. And so I encourage my guys always, and gals now, to, you know, to interact with other vaulters, because you can learn a lot from, and especially, you know, I always have a big group, so I want them to not coach each other, but help each other out. But when you're around other vaulters, be aware of that. It happens, but if you're aware of it, it happens quicker. So, you know, I think I learned that from coaching some better athletes, you know. And I looking back at my vault career, I was afraid to talk to anybody. So at meets, and that would have been my one chance to, you know, but a thing happened once, a little side story here that's kind of interesting. After my junior year, it was the last year that my bad coach was the head coach, and big skies were going to be at NAU. And so a very limited squad. And I had jumped the best I had been jumping, but I didn't make that team. Okay. To go. And that broke my heart. I was just really depressed. I wasn't jumping as well as I wanted to. And the last meet was kind of a last chance qualifier, but I knew I wasn't going to get to go. But I was vaulting, and this guy, James Talley from Idaho State, he was a 16-foot guy, way better vaulter than me. He walked up to me at the end of the meet and says, "Why do you take off so far under?" And I said, "What do you mean?" See, nobody had ever even said. He said, "Well, you're a 1.5 feet under. There's no way you can jump. Your foot should be underneath your top hand." I go, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah." I'm like, "Huh." He said, "That's a big deal, man. I don't know how you jump as high as you jump." So I went back and talked to the head coach, and this is what he always said: "Well, Dan, you just got to do your own thing." Well, my own thing wasn't working, right? So I said, "Well, I'm done. I'm quitting. I'm done." I thought, "I'm done." So a couple of weeks later, just track out over before the end of school. I thought, you know, right? Both calling me back. So I asked him, "Can I take a pole and a crossbar home with me?" He said, yeah, he didn't care. Sure. So my dad lived in Belfry, which is just outside Yellowstone Park in Montana. He was living on a ranch farm, renting the house. So there was this big, huge 10-foot, 50-foot long, 10-foot high pile of silage, right? Chopped up corn. And so I built a little wood box right at the base of that. I made myself a path through the sagebrush. There was a little irrigation canal, so I built a little bridge to run over. Went out and got 2 lodgepole pines and made them the standards. And I could smooth out the dirt. And as it turned out, the bridge became a check mark for me. So I knew where I had to step on the bridge so I could take off correctly. And I started and all of a sudden I got my step out. And so, I was jumping 12 feet. It was a small pole. So I only had to fall 2 feet into the silage because it was 10 feet high. And so I vaulted that summer by myself, and I smoothed out the dirt, and I slowly got, and all of a sudden I got my step on, and it was like, oh, this is easy. This is great. So that kept me vaulting my senior year, but it gave me that was kind of one of those breakthrough aha moments of how important doing something correctly was.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of sense of why I was a coach and how I learned how to coach.
We like to demonize today in 2023 that everybody has a cell phone and social media, but listening to you tell that story, and I have to create the video in my head. You had the video in your head. You did it, right? I sit there and go, oh my gosh, Dan, if you could have had pictures from that day, from videos from that. I mean, that's amazing, right? And that's what I love about cell phones and social media. Like we have that today. Like I the other day, this high school gal, she's teaching I don't know if she's teaching herself or she has someone helping her, but she's learning the hammer. Right. And so, she threw it like 40 feet or something like that. But I think she's a fairly accomplished javelin thrower, actually. And she was like, I'm starting to feel the turns a little bit, and I was like, hey, I commented on it. And I was like, bookmark this tweet, but, keep this video, because in 4 to 8 years, I don't know what year she is in high school, but in some amount of years, like you're going to be decent at it at least. I mean, who knows? She may go on to be an Olympian in it, for crying out loud. But I bet you, because she's starting early, she's going to be pretty decent, and it'll be so cool to see, a video of today being 2029 of her throwing 180 feet. I don't know, and then right after that, show her the first time she threw, and she threw 40. Like that's amazing. So I mean, for that, what you're describing there, through the bushes, and you had to build a little bridge. That's amazing, and that becomes your midpoint essentially. Exactly. Like I would love to see that video, man. That is quite amazing, and really. The definition of I will let nothing stop me. Like I will figure things out one way or the other. I will figure it out. I love it. You answered one of my questions I was going to ask you. I remember for my own coaching education, and you nailed it with the aha moment. One of the first clinics I went to was Marshall Goss, then the head coach at Indiana University. And he was talking about hurdles and how to coach hurdlers and spacing and height of the hurdles. And it was like this aha, like this light turned on, where I was like, oh, like there's an actual way to coach her, not just set them up and say go. And it was like, oh, wait a minute. I bet that's like for every event. I bet there's like actually progressions and teaching and things like, oh man. So for you to have that aha moment of like, oh, I'm under. I didn't even know what under meant. This is the way I did it. You're telling me this is wrong. Oh, wait a minute. Well, that means there's might be other things that I'm doing wrong, and I should learn. So I told you to put it. Good. Can
I just real quick? So the other aha moment, my other quick story is that, well, just, you might ask this, but just a quick synopsis. I left Montana State because I got married and they weren't going to pay me anymore, and I couldn't survive. So I went to work for AmPro, which was Border Pit Catapult, for 1 year. We'll talk about that later. But I couldn't, Southern California wasn't for me. So my wife and I just said, where are we going? So we came to Eugene, just came here with no jobs. And I just forced my way. So I became coach at Lane for 3 years. And then Andrzej Szczecinski left Oregon. He was the vault coach, the Nike coach. So I just walked into Bill Dillinger and said, you need to hire me as your vault coach. And he said, okay. So I've coached at Oregon from 91 through 96. And then some other things happened. But the other major thing that happened to me was in 93. Sergey Bubka jumped at the pre. He came a week early, so I got to watch him train. Okay, and so I'm becoming a better coach, I feel like, but I know there's things I'm not quite following through with, and so here's Sergey Bubka, who arguably best ever. Right, 35 world records at the time.
Okay, I was about to say today you have to have maybe a different discussion
at the time,
but for sure up until today.
But 35 world records is 35 world records.
All right, Dan, we're gonna have to get into this discussion now. Okay, yeah, but it's the vault where you could set it a quarter inch at a time.
I know.
Now I'm not taking away his greatness. Up until today, certainly Buka
Yeah.
was the best
Yeah.
vaulter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, number 2 is not a bad place, because the guy who's doing it now, who I think is
Mondo
number
is
1,
going to be the best.
and I
Yeah.
don't think he's getting enough credit for what he's doing today. Mondo, like, I know he's getting a lot of credit, but we're still talking about Noah Lyles, and by the way, Noah Lyles should also
Right.
be talked about, and
Right.
Sydney and etc. And nothing. I mean, they're doing
Right.
amazing, but no one's as dominant as Mondo
No,
is right
no,
now
no,
in
absolutely,
vaults.
absolutely. No, and I would have that discussion and believe it absolutely. But but even if you can do the same thing again, even if it's 1 centimeter, you do it again and again and again.
Certainly, that's right. Great
But
point.
anyway, so at the time, but
Great
one
point.
of his great attributes was his plant and takeoff.
Hmm.
Certainly Bubka was as good a technician at that point, and everybody thought he was way faster, but now we see Mondo's even faster. So I mean, there's all those, but that was a fact. And so here's the best guy in the world doing walking plant drills
You've never seen that before.
with and without a pole,
Uh-huh.
doing drills that high school kids are past, focused to the max, doing walking. And I went, oh, so that's the secret. Not just doing them, but having the discipline to focus on that basic thing, where everything else comes from in the vault. And I had been lucky enough to be around some international class American vaulters. They would no more have done something at that time. They would no more have done it something like that. They were way past that.
Huh.
And all of a sudden I realized, so that's a story that every kid gets that I coach, and I drive them crazy, because we do those same kind of drills, and I am on them. That everything has to be perfect at that level, and then I'm way less perfectionist when they vault. Because you got to give some people some room. But the point being is, I learned that's the secret: is can you be disciplined enough to not just do the basics, but to do them correctly,
to do the fundamentals at a really high level.
At a high level, and focused. So that just changed my whole worldview of, so that's what if I want to be that coach, I want to be that, I got to start doing that. So
I asked you to put a pin in something. We're going to keep a pin, because
okay.
I want to know, why Eugene? You guys just so you're down in Southern California working for Ampro. I know you'd lived in Oregon before, but you're really a Montana guy at this point. That's where a lot of your fundamental years had been going. Why did you just pick Eugene?
Well, a couple of reasons. My wife had been born and spent a couple of years on the Northwest, but she had lived almost her entire life in Montana, in Bozeman, and spring. So she had kind of an affinity for the Northwest, and we had come out when I coached at Montana State. Spring break, we had come out to Eugene for the preview meet that they had. A lot of times on our own with 1 or 2 athletes. I'd come out and seen Hayward Field, right? And I didn't like snow, never did like snow. I just felt like I just always had a great feeling in Eugene, Oregon. Okay. And it wasn't quite Tracktown then. So this is the early 80s, but still, right, it was still the trials in 80 had been at Hayward. That was the last time, until for quite a few years they weren't there.
Oh, right.
Right. That was the Olympics that didn't happen for us, but the trials were there. So, I mean, there was that, but we were down in California and had no options. We just said, where do we want to live? And we both thought, well, Eugene's. And a little aside, the first year I coached at Montana State, there was this great guy that was an athlete for us that threw shot and disc by the name of Lance Deal. So I never coached Lance, but I was one of the coaches for Lance. Okay. And so Lance and Nancy were living in Eugene. So, and Chris had a friend actually that was living in Eugene. So we thought, at least we know somebody there.
Yeah.
So we just packed up and moved to Eugene.
Love Lance.
And found a way to we found jobs. We just found a way to make it here. Yeah.
Love Lance Deal. He's a Gill podcast alum, and my favorite trivia question about Lance, and I'll, instead of asking as a question, I'll just say it. I was blown away. I visited Montana State, I don't know, probably 10 years ago. I'm sure I've told you, Dan, this story. And I go, they have the records books, the record boards. And I go to look at the hammer because I'm thinking, oh, of course, Lance Deal holds the school record. I mean, come on. No, in fact, when I interviewed him, I looked it up on my phone while we were interviewing. I think he's like fourth, fifth, or sixth. Like he's down, but like he's not number 2 even. Like he's down. In fact, he owns the discus school record though, which I found quite amazing. But just was amazed that he did not own the state, the school record for the event he goes on and wins a medal, American record. I mean, that's just phenomenal. It's just phenomenal. So you've been to Eugene. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, I thought it was like this, throw a dart. All right, we're going to go to Eugene because they vault there, and I'm a vaulter, so that's where I'm going. So the second part of that story, though, Dan, that just was like, I got to hear more about this. You said you walked into Bill Dellinger. Now, come on, if you're going to make a Mount Rushmore of college track and field coaches, a lot of people are going to have him on the Mount Rushmore. This is a big time coach, and you just walked in his office like, hey, you need to hire me as your vault coach.
Well, not quite in those words, but almost. So I had been coaching at Lane and had some success with some kids. And Andrzej Shazinski did a great coach, obviously, but he was more focused on his group had more post-collegians, Olympic athletes. So Nike kind of pulled their funding for him. So Andrzej quit coaching. And I mean, there was a big gap there, and it's the vault. You need somebody that's, so I just thought, and it was a little scary, a little intimidating, but, and there's nothing like being kind of young, right. So you just don't know. So I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to walk in there and tell him that, I'm his guy. And, let's go. Let's do it. Let's try it. And I'd say Rob Stark was my first mentor, but certainly Bill Dellinger was an important mentor for me because, some people criticize Bill and I don't think they quite understood him. And he kind of got left behind with the way track is now. He was still too old school. He had learned from Bowerman, and recruiting wasn't what they did. And it was not really what you should do. Okay. People should want to come to your school and then you coach them. But all the little nuances that he had that made him such a great coach, I really, really listened to. He was not a micromanager at all. He let me coach. And if I had questions, he helped me out. To me, he's one of the best coaches, obviously, I've ever got the opportunity. Not just because of his position, but the coach that he was and the person. And we got along great. And it's funny, a lot of people thought he hated the vault because he used to get really mad at Andrzej, because Andrzej would not focus the training or his guys for the Pac-12 championship or even NCAAs. He was always trying to focus them for summer meets because that's how he had always coached. And that drove, so there was a lot of no heights at Pac-12. So Bill loved the vault. And he had actually he wished he had been a vaulter. He was a gymnast in high school along with a distance runner. So we got along great. He loved it. And I think he liked my passion, my energy level. So those years were great coaching with him. And I feel like I really learned a lot.
Well, that's cool. Were you still practicing with the athletes at Oregon as well?
Yeah, you let me train.
So I'm curious about that because I've had this philosophy of that topic, but it's typically born around distance runners and coaches, with a distance coach running with their athletes, both in maybe their more casual long run, and even in workout, repeat 1Ks, whatever. And I can remember having this discussion back when I was a high school coach. So this is back in 94, 95, long time, or 95, 96, long time ago. And I'm sure, we're all just kind of a mashup of other people, you talk about Dellinger and other coaches, people speak into you and, things that resonate with you, you carry on. So I'm sure I heard this from someone else. but I remember I've always had this philosophy of like, oh, you can never win as a coach who competes or who practices with your athletes. Because on one hand, if you're beating them, it's a little demoralizing for them that here's this, no matter what your actual age is, you're older than them. So here's this old guy beating me, whether you're 25 years old, whether you're straight out of college, it's still like, well, man, this guy's past his prime. I'm trying to get where he is or she is, and they're beating me. So there's a demoralizing effect. And then if and when remember, it's all kind of in distance running land for me. When they go on to start beating you in long runs or repeats, there's like the thought was in my head was always that, well, there's a loss of respect of like, well, how can you coach me? I'm beating you, I'm physically beating, like, not just, it's not just on paper that I could beat you. Like, here it is, we're actually doing it. Now, having said all that, when you were describing not competing, when you describe practicing with your athletes as a vaulter, that I didn't get the same, like, normally if you were a distance coach and you told me that, I'd be like, I don't know if I agree with you on that one there, Coach Dan. But when you said it with vaulting, I was like, well, vaulting's different, not only because it's a different event, it's a different culture. I that possibly could work out. Obviously it has, through your career, but that was resonated with me. You never had any issues, the ones I kind of described in my head of distance world. You never had those issues of disrespect of like, oh man, Dan, Coach West, you're jumping 13 feet. I'm a 15-foot vaulter. Just get out of here. You never had any issues with that.
No, I think, as in most things in life, it's how you approach it. Correct. So I talk with my athletes and I'm real honest with them. And so we set it out from the beginning correctly. And I believe that one of the mistakes that coaches make is some coaches, their self-worth becomes their athlete's success.
100%.
Their ego gets in the way. So I tell my athletes, that's not going to happen with me. My self-worth is my own vaulting. I'm here to help you. I'm your coach. I want you to be the best you can be. I get my own self-worth. So, and so we started out that way. So I'm just training. And, and there are still, actually, it's funny, there's a couple of exercises, since I'm an old wise guy, I know how to do them correctly. I still beat some athletes on a couple of testing things, strength, balance kind of things. But I never come at it as I'm beating you. I'm doing it. I'm doing it. So, it's how you present it. If there are people that like to brag and set it up as a competition.
Right.
And if you come at it that way, then what you're saying is absolutely. But if I just love the pole vault, I'm working out, we're going to move the pit. I move the pit with them. I mean, we are a team. So I'm part of that team.
Yeah.
I'm the coach, but we're part of that team. So that's how I think I've gotten it through. And the kids, of course, now for the last 10 years, right, I'm just this crazy old guy, right?
Yeah, right. It's certain some age you get right there, right?
Yeah, so now that's not even, but the fact that I even do it, they're just like, yeah, hey,
that's good,
coach, and I do less, a little bit less all the time. There's some things I just can't quite do. I don't want to hold them up, but I used to sprint with, I'm not the fastest guy, but I still do almost all the workouts.
Yeah.
So it is a balance, and they're first. My training is second, always. So I keep that perspective. And that's where a lot of people lose it too. Their training is more important than their coaching.
Yeah.
So if you do that, then you've lost it.
Yeah.
The kids know that. So, I'm just doing it with them. So I've just found this place where it worked for me. I don't know if it would work for everybody. I've been fortunate that every head coach I've ever had, there's been a couple that kind of didn't want me to do it, but I had to explain to them that was not going to happen. That's the way I do it. So, and the vault is specialized enough, right, that people are desperate to have a vault coach, so they probably let me do almost anything.
Yeah, you do have, if you're a vault coach, and especially if you're a good vault coach, you've got some upper hands out there. That's for sure. Yeah. I found it interesting when you talked about, coaches who find their self-worth, their identity in what their athletes are doing. Because earlier you had mentioned about like having your athletes talk to other vaulters, good vaulters, and that even you had at one point were like, oh man, I'm gonna paraphrase this in my words. So correct me if I'm misspeaking here a little bit, like, oh, I'm not worthy enough to talk to this 18-foot. I'm a 12-foot vaulter, and I've seen that. And what's interesting, I had that a little bit as well, but I'll see that when we have, we try to have at least one teammate here at Gill who's a vault specialist, right?
Right.
And even like, one who just was here and now works for Anheuser-Busch of all companies. He's amazing. We love him. In fact, he was on the Gill podcast. River Morrow. River was,
Right.
he was an okay vaulter. I mean, first of all,
Right.
I never vaulted, so you're amazing if you clear any stinking bar in my book. But he wasn't a national qualifier or anything like that. But he was a good, solid, mid-major, whatever you want to call it, at Coastal Carolina. But he and I would have talks, and I'd be like, hey, yeah, let me introduce you to Jeff Hartwig. Jeff's a good friend of mine. I'm like, oh, let me introduce you. He's like, oh, I don't know, man. That guy jumped 6 meters and American record holder. And I was like, hey, no, it's just Jeff, bro. Like, I know he jumped really high. I get that, but you know what? He's just, I mean, he's a normal person. That's something he did really well, but like he has a lot of other things that who he is. He's he's a father, and he's a friend, and he's a reptile, breeder. Like that's not his identity. Just like it's not your identity that you were. I can't remember what Rivers' PR was, but it's like that doesn't jive, man. Like you have passion for the vault, so you should be able to talk to the Brad Walkers, the Derek Miles, Toby Steve. They're people first that happen to do something really amazing, but they're people first. So
Absolutely.
I love that kind of reminder of like, that's not your identity. Who you are, your PR, while is extremely important. No one's a bigger fan of PRs than I am. That's not your identity. That just happens to be what you have done in that specific event up to this point.
Yeah. And there's quite a few events in track and field that are like that, but certainly the pole vault humbles you pretty quickly. And if you're authentic and you give it your best shot, you run down there and you plant the pole and bend it and get upside down, then you have everybody's respect in the vault world, whether you're a 10-foot vaulter or a 20-foot vaulter. And if you don't have any airs about you, or if you're not defensive, if you're just there, then you're accepted. And that is a beautiful thing about the vault. And obviously in the vault, we are a pretty close-knit community. So you can be a part of that community, which was a lesson I learned along the way too. Like, oh, I can be a part of this. Right. One time at the summit, I was vaulting, and I must have been 45, between 45 and 50 in that time frame. And I was getting myself pumped up to jump 14 feet. It's a good jump for my age group. And Toby walked by and got all pumped up with me. Toby Stevenson. So, those things happen.
That's cool.
Right? So, take it.
And at the end of the day, if you're a vaulter, you end like your whole career, you end as a failure. You lose you're unsuccessfully for 99.9% vaulters. You're ending on failure. So it's a little different ball game just for that alone.
Absolutely.
So you are at Oregon for, I think you said 6, 7, 8 years, somewhere around there.
Right.
Why leave? What happened?
NCAA. I had a really good vaulter, Jeremy Williams, and he jumped 17.8 at Washington State. Getting ready to jump 18. He was a decathlete somewhat too, but mostly a vaulter. And after that meet, Bill called me in and said, Dan, I hate to tell you this, but there's a rule I wasn't aware of. And, the rules on volunteer coaches have changed. And that was the year where we were a split program, men only. So you get 3 volunteer coaches, a cross country, an indoor, and an outdoor, but you could only travel with the season that you were designated for. So I was the indoor coach. So that means we got busted. I couldn't travel. And I thought, oh, what? I'm volunteering and now I can't even go to the meets.
Yeah, this seems really dumb. Yeah.
I'm not doing that. I'm not, and Jeremy went to the Pac. He got second at Pac-12s down in Tempe, but he made some mistakes going to polls, right? And then he went to nationals, and Bob Fraley told me, man, it's too bad you weren't there because Jeremy really needed you. It was a little swirly wind, and he had a chance to have been, 18-4 and placed, been an All-American. And I just thought, it's bad enough you're not paying me. Now you're not going to let me go to meet, so I'm done with this. So I just coached some high schools and opened people and masters people for a few years, the end of the 90s. And then in 2000, another one of my really good friends and a guy that helped mentor me, but Grady O'Connor, who, it's funny, he had actually been an athlete at Oregon, football player, intermediate hurdler, but he was the head coach at Lane Community College. And Grady, at that time in 2000, he said, Dan, you got to come out and I need a ball coach, and you can come 1 day a week, 2 days a week, whatever you want. I just need somebody. So that's when I started back, because I had coached at Lane from 88 to 91. For a couple of years there, I coached both at Lane and at U of O, and then realized that maybe there was an NCAA violation potential there. So I quit coaching at Lane. So in 2000, I started coaching at Lane again, and I've been there ever since.
That had to be like a dagger in your heart. Again, Fraley, one of the pioneers of pole vaulting for us in this era, to say, hey, Dan, boy, too bad you couldn't have been there. He really could have used you, and through no fault of your own. It's not like you chose a different event or, to not go. That's like devastation for coach.
Yeah. And it's, it's pretty exciting to be. It was pretty exciting to be at Oregon, and I inherited a British vaulter when I first started. So Mike Edwards, and he improved enough that his sponsor brought me. So I got to coach Mike at the 91 World Championships and
really?
at Tokyo, and at the Barcelona Olympics. So I got to coach at the Olympics.
Wow.
And it was he did pretty good at Tokyo and did horrible. That's a whole nother story. But I did that level, and I coached. And once again, for me, trying to always balance, keep my ego. It's certainly great to coach great athletes and be in that spotlight. And it's one of the best experiences of my life. But that's not why I coach. And if I have somebody, just a couple of years ago, I had a little girl. She was an 8-foot vaulter, and I let her walk on because I know her coach from high school, and it was a nightmare until finally she figured some things out, and she jumped her last meet. She jumped 10 feet. For her, that was, and I never thought that was going to happen. A little 5 foot, and so for me, that's as important as sitting in the stands and being an Olympic coach.
Absolutely.
So at that point, the amount of politics and pressure that there is at Oregon, even back then, but now especially, it's not worth it to me. So, a lot of people, and actually my athletes ask me, well, why do you coach at Lane Community College? Right. Well, there's a number of reasons. One of the big reasons is because there's no recruiting violations. So high school kids can come and jump with me. I can help. Coach calls me up. I can't, I don't know what's going on here. They can come and vault with me. There's no restriction on how many vaulters I can have. Right. It's a little tough to get kids to the junior college sometimes, but I'm free. I get to help kids and develop them, and hopefully send them off to a 4-year school if that's what they want to do. Some of them, they just want to jump a little bit more, and then they're done with school. There's all those different, but I get to just coach with no politics. And we're fortunate at Lane, we have great facilities, and I've been in long enough. I have enough poles. So those things that we talked about, I have a good facility. I have equipment, and I've got kids. I only have them for 2 years, which is hard sometimes. Sometimes it's good. You should move on. But so it's a perfect situation. No pressure of that. And not, there's still pressure to compete well, but right now, being in Oregon that's a tough gig right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Like that picture of the 180 of growing up with no facilities and no poles and no coaching. And now, Lane, arguably one of the top facilities, and some of it's because of proximity of Eugene with Olympic trials and Prefontaines and stuff. You guys are the dedicated practice track for a lot of the athletes coming in from other countries and other places in the United States. That's quite amazing where you started to where you are, my friend.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I'm a former junior college coach myself in the Kansas world, Kansas Jayhawk Conference. There's my understanding, maybe it's 4. There's several different groups of junior college. So you have the California, they have their own North and South California system. You have the NJCAA. I think there is a Division 3 that's probably still under NJCAA, kind of up in the Northeast.
It is.
And then you have this Northwest. I've never really understood it. Can you just talk to us about this Northwest junior college system that Lane Community College is in?
Well, so I think it was originally they broke it up into three. You're right. There's three, and the reason was just cost saving measures. Okay, so that's what they decided. So there's three national meets. There's California, there's the Northwest Athletic NWAC, and then there's the rest of the country, which seems kind of strange to me. But there's enough schools in California, obviously, and the NWAC is Washington, Idaho, Oregon. Really, that's it. That's it. So we have our own championship meet. So there's each of those three, the top three placers are all Americans. So there's 9 all Americans each year, and 3 national champions. So we have, as in track, we go to meets all over the place. But we have our championship meet. We have a regional meet in Oregon right before NWACS that is a championship meet, just the Oregon schools. But that's just a thing that we do ourselves. It's not, but yeah, it seems kind of strange, and it would be nice if there was one national meet, maybe, but finances being what they are, so that's why they've done that.
To your knowledge, have they ever talked about assimilating into the NJCAA? Because I get travel and budget. Come on, you and I, we get budgets better maybe than anybody. But New York is still coming to wherever the NJCAA and Florida and wherever.
Right. I'm not sure why they've done it that way, but that was the rationale.
That's interesting.
And so that's just the way it is now. So,
and you're under your own separate rule book there.
Well, it's our conference. I mean, all junior colleges, the rule book, mostly we follow the NCAA rule book.
Okay.
But we also have some of our own, and maybe each conference, I think each conference has their own. I mean, for a while we couldn't recruit outside of, we had to only recruit from states that were adjacent to the NWAC.
Yeah, that's what I wondered. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but now they've kind of loosened that. It's evolving like all conferences are. And now they just passed a thing where a kid can transfer one time without having to set up. That's been a thing where you had to get released from your school, but now you can just transfer. So it kind of evolves along like what the rest of the what Division I thinks. But basically, we only have fee waivers. We don't have full ride scholarships. That's an NWAC thing, and school thing. So there are some kind of conference things that we have to follow.
The junior college, whether you're in California, Oregon, or middle of Kansas, it's really special to me. Again, partly because I'm so glad that I at least spent 1 year there coaching. I respect high school coaches. It's an unbelievable job what you do, getting kids that have never done any event most of the time and creating teams out of that and helping them go on to be recruited by 2-year and 4-year institutions. And it's amazing what 4-year college coaches on every level, NAIA, Division III, et cetera, what they do, going out and trying to find the best high schoolers they can to come into their 4-year institution. A junior college coach is doing both. You are routinely looking for what high schoolers can you bring to your team and what sophomores can you help move on to the next route. And so that I say the NJCAA because that's the meet I go to, the junior college national meet. It's really special to me. I mean, these are kids that are, for lack of better terms, misfits, needed second tries, third tries, 4 tries. No one wanted them. They weren't good enough at the time to go 4-year, et cetera. And they just needed someone to believe in them in the middle of Kansas or the middle outside of Eugene. It's really like when I see the national meet and when I see the meet that you guys host there and I look at the results and I'm just like, wow, man, these kids, like someone believed in them. They believed in themselves too, by the way, to your point about some kids just want to vault for a couple more years and they end up becoming really stinking good. That's a different, I don't know, man, that's just a different to me. It's much more heartfelt. I watch these meets and I'm just like, oh man, like bravo to you. You didn't give up and someone didn't give up on you.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It is a really, I feel obviously I'm biased, but it's important place for kids to land. For an awful lot of kids, obviously we have a lot of kids that academically aren't ready and we can help them with that. And we have an awful lot of kids that athletically aren't ready. And a lot of times because, especially in the vault, I get kids that all the time. I got a girl coming in this year. She had one pole in high school. She had one pole.
It's the Dan West. The Dan West special.
And she didn't jump very high. And she's going to walk on, and we'll see. Somebody that Morgan Fossen. Mm-hmm. She walked on to my program because she was not a good high school vaulter, and I wasn't sure that I even wanted her to walk on. So that's how. I mean, she was a 10-foot, one-time 10-foot vaulter, wasn't bending the pole much, and had no idea what she was doing. So, okay, you can walk on. And we'll see. And then all of a sudden, she's somebody that I just, wow, one of the best people I've ever coached, person-wise. And all of a sudden, she's a 12.6 school record holder, and then goes on. And she had some struggles at Eastern Washington, but to end up being a second team All-American, jump 13.9. I mean, that's a success story.
I 100%
helped her along the way find out who Morgan really was. So, right. And the cool thing about junior college is just the reality. The first 2 years in college, you're going to take the same classes. Mm-hmm. So nobody gets behind by going to a junior college. And every once in a while, I talk to some kids that could go to a 4-year into coming, just because they want to jump with me and be a part of our program. But most of the time, there's a reason why kids, and we lose a lot of kids. I mean, there's a reason. So that's a frustrating part. A lot of kids decide they don't want to go to school. They flunk out. And pretty much you have to decide you don't want to go to school to flunk out of junior college. You have to work at it, basically, But that happens all the time. Some kids decide they don't want to be an athlete anymore. And like I said, we end up sending kids. We've got some kids at Oregon. I've sent kids to Washington. A lot of the Big Sky schools for sure. Yeah. I have a lot of contacts there, so that is a fun part. Trying to help them, get them ready, send them off. And the kids that just wanted to jump, hopefully they jump to PR and they're happy. And so many kids that are trying to decide if they want to stay or not. I tell them, well, someday you're going to be 45, 50 years old. You're going to look back and ask yourself, why did I quit that? What could I have done? I said, so here's you got the rest of your life to work. Here's your chance to find out how high you can vault. Don't give it up. Don't give it up. Hang in there with it. But a lot of kids they get parental pressures, societal pressures, and they decide they have to work.
Yeah.
They don't hang in there, which I think is unfortunate for them. They'll realize down the road, we all have to work at some point. Why not take advantage of that college experience?
Yeah, say not much is important. 18 to 22-year-olds, meaning not much you can do is going to affect 40, 50. I mean, that's 20 years from now. You got a lot of time to make mistakes and still make things happen. I didn't find my career here until I was 30, for crying out loud.
Right,
so
exactly.
Yeah. The story about Morgan, and I'm sure other sports probably say the same thing, but that it always makes me think of like, man, what could the records be? The world records, the school records, etc. We're already the number one participated sport on high school and collegiate level. So we certainly have our number of at-bats, if you will. But I wonder, for the famous side of it, like, man, what if LeBron James had been a long jumper or a high jumper? Like, there's so many amazing athletes in other sports, and there's so many amazing athletes just walking the streets that never even tried or wanted to try pole vaulting, high jumping, hammer throwing. It's like, man, there's, there's some 22-foot pole vaulter just walking around that never didn't know what the pole vault was was a chess player in high school. I don't know, but it's like, man, if we could figure out how to get everybody at least try the sport. I just know there's some athletes that we have just missed just because they're not in the sport. Not in the sport.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, here at Gill Athletics, we're manufacturers. So we make the equipment that is out there. So pits and hurdles and poles and discuses. I mean, it's quite amazing. I always tell people it's kind of like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory right across that wall, right over there. It's quite amazing what the men and women do back there. I'm in awe. It's like black magic to me. We bring in this stick of steel, cut it, weld it, paint it, and voila, there's a pole vault standard. It boggles my mind. I'm just not a handy guy. And then we have this great partnership with companies around the country. And the company that you work for, Dan, and worked for as long as I've known you, OnTrack and Field, first with the great Ron Morris. And we're going to have a story of a Ron story here, because, you don't get to become a gold medalist in the pole vault and have a vaulter on the show without, talking about that. And now Steve owns it. Steve Ringgold there, doing a great job. You guys have there at OnTrack have represented and served coaches around the country. I always think of it California, but I got to remind myself, first of all, you're not in California, and you serve lots of coaches, and OnTrack is a very national company, doing a great job representing Gill equipment to high school and college coaches around the country. How did that start? How did you get on with Ron Morris at OnTrack?
Well, you want the short version or the long version?
Our average length is 1 hour and 45, and we're only at the 1 hour and 10 mark, my friend. We got plenty of time. You tell the story how you want to tell the story.
I think I am a little unique in my position as an outside sales guy. So it took a pretty strange path to get me where I am at today. So it really starts in 1987. In 85, I got married and I had 2 stepsons. So all of a sudden I have a family.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And up until that point, not being paid a lot wasn't that big of an issue for me. Looking back, maybe it should have been, but I was making $8,000 a year. And so I go into the athletic director and I say, hey man, is this going to change? Because I can't survive. And he said, I don't see it changing it. So I go, well, I got to do something different. And luckily I knew Jan Johnson and he knew the people at Ampro. So I called them up and said, hey, you should hire me. And they flew me down. So all of a sudden I was the pole guy for Catapult and Porterpin. It was Ampro in Anaheim.
Right.
And luckily, Jim Barrier had been one of the original engineers with Herb Jinks, invented the modern fiberglass. And Jim was in the aerospace at the time, but he was a composite engineer. So Jim taught me the engineering and the design principles behind the vaulting pole, and very quickly saw what Catapult was doing wrong, what we needed to do to fix that. So we fixed the pole, and I got to market it. I was part of the R&D, but mostly he taught me everything about composites, fiberglass, and what makes a pole work the way it's supposed to work or not work. And I'm a good student. I really understood what he was doing. And we actually got Dave Kenworthy on the pole, and he won indoors that year. So everything was just going, man, this is like, wow. We had an ad campaign going. I was really excited. And then all of a sudden it just got cut off. And I found out that the owner was spending his money on an $8,000 golf cart. And I didn't like California. So I left.
Yeah.
Okay. I just told him I left. Actually, I told him I'm going to leave in the fall. So I'll give you some, this was in May, the end of May, give you some time to bring somebody in. I can train him. He said, no, you're fired that day.
Wow.
So we all of a sudden we were just out in the cold in Anaheim going home. Oh, I guess I should have kept my mouth shut. I didn't realize that. So we came up to Eugene, found some other things to do. But when I started coaching for Bill Dillinger, he talked Dick Held, who invented javelin, to hiring me for Oregon track equipment.
Yeah.
Knew nothing about javelins or discus. Started as just a grunt labor guy, but by 3 or 4 years, I was running. Dick did not want to have to do that. So I was actually, Ron Johnson and I were supposed to be running it, but Ron really didn't want to do anything. So I was running Oregon track equipment. I built all the discs and
pause right there for a second, because we have to give some historical context to this just here a little bit. Our average listener here is 35 to 40 years old. So you just named, first of all, go back to Ampro. You named Herb Jinks the godfather of fiberglass vaulting poles. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The inventor. Yeah.
You as a vaulter, as we, I've heard now your story, and obviously, it feels like if I were to to cut your arm, you would bleed vaulting poles. I mean, that's or maybe shards of fiberglass.
Yeah, there you go.
So you have to be thinking a little bit like a kid in a candy store when you're there working on vaulting poles. I mean, you came through,
Oh
you
yeah.
started with a steel in your back alley, you saw bamboo and you see the progression of fiberglass, and you're in the muck of it, in the middle of it, learning it, fixing it, I mean, that's
Yeah. No,
outside of being a full-time coach, that seemed like that was maybe a dream job at that
oh,
moment.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Very, very exciting.
And then that goes south a little bit, but now you go to Oregon Track Equipment, OTE, Oregon Track Equipment, and you're working with Dick Held. Come on,
yeah,
legend. Ron
yeah,
Johnson. Come on, legend. I mean, Bill
right,
Dellinger, the owner. I mean, that's
yeah,
you're in a really special time with really special people in regards to specifically the equipment side of track and field, which we all
yeah,
know how intensive equipment
right.
for track and field
Oh,
is.
absolutely. You know, and the javelin is such a special implement, aerodynamic, even though they changed the rules not as much as it was. But
Right.
the things that Dick invented and did, and you know, once again, I was a good student,
Yeah.
and I learned everything that Dick wanted to teach me about not just the process, but why we were doing it, why the you know, and the OTE comp still has a world record.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even though everybody wants to throw carbons, but the what he did to make that javelin the best javelin that's ever been.
Yeah.
Um, New rule and the old rules, he had the world record with the old rule javelin too.
Yep.
So there was specific things that he did to make a javelin fly far, and he was a genius,
Yeah.
absolutely. And
Huh.
so to work with him and to learn that was really, you know, it was a great opportunity. Some hard times because we were a little tiny company trying to make it. But I you know, the discus was real. I really loved the discus, building the discus, fixing some things, you know, and our discus won the Olympics in '96, Riedel threw it. So that was a big deal for us, you know,
Sure.
and you know, and of course, at the time, Puskas was the top javelin thrower, and he would send his javelins to us, and we would rework them every year to make them just barely legal so they would
Right.
fly. And those are the javelins that Celestine would borrow to set all his records with, were Tom's javelins. So to be a part of that was really pretty amazing. But we weren't making it. We didn't have the backing, financial backing,
Right.
and the hurdle. Great, you know, we had the automatic hurdle, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a craftsman. We were a little craftsman shop, right? But it, it was almost costing as much as we were selling stuff for. So luckily, this crazy company, who, you know, and I don't know if you know this, but in 1990, I worked for Gil. Did you know?
Really? I didn't know
I
that
worked
part. No.
because 91 actually, because I coached Dave Hodge for a fall before he
Okay.
left. I had a connection. I called him up. Once again, there's a theme there. Said, you need to hire
You need
me.
to hire me. I knew where that's going.
But so they tried it. But you know, at the time there was no internet.
Right.
Hardly. So having somebody work offsite, it just didn't work.
Yeah.
I tried. They tried. We just couldn't make it work. There's just no way, you know.
Yeah.
So I had that connection, and so luckily Gil bought OTE,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, you brought all the Gil javelins out and all the discus stuff, and so from 98, 99, right in there till 2004, I ran the plant
Right.
at here in Eugene, and actually, you know, I miss those days. That may have been my funnest time in my professional career because I was still
Okay.
coaching,
Mm-hmm.
but I was also running the plant, building javelins and discs, eh, getting to do the R&D stuff. You know, I was actually able to be part of the R&D behind the FX vaulting
Oh
poles,
yeah.
and with the flex chart changes, and
Uh-huh.
going down to the Olympic Training Center with the javelins and discs, really trying to do those kinds of things interactive to improve the product. So that was incredible. So,
That is incredible.
but things change, and you guys needed to consolidate, and I
Mhm.
certainly understand that. And being after my experience with Ampro, trying to live in California, I know myself, and while I had some great offers, and it was probably the hardest decision of my life to there's no way I was going to make it in Illinois. I'm a West Coast mountain fly fishing kind of guy, and I would have failed, and I knew that. So I stayed here. So all of a sudden now I don't have. I got to figure out what to do. So I've got on board with First to Finish.
Oh, is that right?
Year and a half. As an outside guy, and it was not. They were trying to figure it out. It was not a great marriage, and then they decided they didn't want any outside people at all. So they got rid of all of us within 6 months. So once again, I was sitting here with trying to figure out what the hell am I going to do. And that first time when First to Finish hired me after Gil had left, you guys had left, I contacted Ron, and he almost pulled the trigger, but he wasn't. Ron Morris with OnTrack. And I had worked with Ron clear back in my Ampro days is when I met
I was wondering if there was a connection.
I met him, and then OTE days we sold to Ron stuff. But he wasn't ready. He wasn't ready to make that commitment. It just seemed too much for him to do because he's a pretty small shop. But after First to Finish decided that, and I called him back up, and he said, "You know what, Dan? I missed it the first time. I'm not going to miss it this time." So he said, "We'll figure out a way to make it work." And so that was in 2007.
Wow.
Okay. So it went really well. And obviously Ron's one of the best guys on the planet. And he does have great stories, but great integrity. So it was fun to be a part. And since I had manufactured and I still coach and I'm still jumping, he thought, so I never really wanted to be a salesman necessarily. That wasn't a goal of mine, but I look at it as I'm just helping my buddies out, get what they need, track equipment. So that was going along fine until the pandemic and COVID just was more than Ron could handle.
Yeah.
And being that he's in his 80s,
which
is much. So basically OTE shut down, and so once again, what the hell am I going to do? And luckily Steve Ringgold, who's a great guy and energetic and smart, brought OnTrack back, and I'm selling equipment again.
First of all, I would wonder in a different universe, if Steve didn't bring you back, would you have said Steve's smart? He was obviously very smart. You're like, he's very smart. He kept me on. He brought me on. He's very intelligent man. And Steve, we love you. You'd be intelligent no matter what. We get it. Get it. What's it like? Again, I just think about this. Cut you open and fiberglass comes out, and you're working with Ron Morris, who, I was impressed the very first time I ever met Ron, because you mentioned 80 years old, at his age and stage, he was with it, buddy. I mean, would, if you didn't know, if you were only like on the phone or something with him, you might not have known he was 80 years old. I mean, he was very involved in the business that he owned, very involved in vaulting. I mean, he was really good. What was it like working for, a gold medal? Vault has been your life since 5th grade, and here you are working for a gold medalist in the vault.
Yeah. Well, and he's so authentic, and so a lot of people,
great description of him, by the way. Nailed it.
Yeah, a lot of people talk the talk, but he cares about track and field. So it was about getting equipment to athletes and coaches to help them out, and of course, he was also a tough nut, because some of the things that he did, he had the high school record at one time, the national high school record on bamboo. He jumped 13, 3 or 6, 13, between somewhere in there. And then to get onto steel in college, and get to the Olympics, he jumped 15.8. And most of the guys in the steel back in that era were big guys, big, strong, because you had to be, and he wasn't. So he was a great technician. So he learned how to vault really well. Okay. And, he's got great stories about bad pits, talk about bad pits landing, not just in sawdust, but in sand, sometimes jumping 14 feet, landing in a basically a long jump pit. Just incredible. But then everybody quit when fiberglass came, and except so there was a new batch of young guys that had started on steel, but all the guys that had been jumping steel, and he didn't. He kept jumping. So 15.8 was right at the world record. He had shots at the world record, and then he jumped 16.6 and a little bit on glass. So and probably the most amazing thing about him, I'm just telling these stories because it says who he is. He never no-highted in his whole career. I don't know anybody.
Wow. No, everybody.
Yeah, he never no-highted. And so, that just kind of, that's who Ron Morris was. And he coached for a while, but that wasn't his passion. And I think finding the equipment side of it to help people was really the side that really worked for him to help everything out.
Yeah.
But genuine guy. He loved to tell stories. He loved to hear my stories. So we got along great. We got along
I
great.
can imagine. I can imagine. Oh man, that's awesome. Well, we were so happy, Ron did an amazing job building On Track and Field, and a company like that, you start having legacy, you start having roots into the sport of track and field. On Track is very important for track and field. And so as Ron, during COVID and trying to sell the business, there was a little bit of touch and go of like, is this the end of On Track? And it was like, oh man, that's not right. It's not right for Ron's legacy, to be honest with you. And so I was very happy when Steve Ringgold, came along, purchased it. And again, obviously was very intelligent by keeping you going on there as well. So what's it been like? Not a lot of people know what we do, what you do,
Right,
serving
right.
coaches with
Yeah.
track and field equipment, let me say it here loud and clear. Everything you see in our catalog, Dan West and On Track sells. It's not they only sell this or that or whatnot. They full line. They're one of our great partners out there. What's it like? You didn't grow up wanting to be a salesman. You weren't a salesman. You were a plant manager. You were a javelin builder. You were a pole builder. What's it like transitioning to sales? And I think, and you're probably gonna say it again when you talked about helping my buddies get equipment. At the end of the day, what our job is to serve others. What's that been like, switching that role into being a servant for other coaches to help them not grow up the way you grew up with one pole and no pit and things like that?
Well, yeah, you say that's exactly it, and it's there's a balance there. There's some challenges, right? Because we all have budgets, and so some equipment doesn't really matter. Some equipment, it matters a lot, the quality, the level, and the higher the quality, the more you're going to pay for it. So there's always that balance of what's the best thing for that part of your program. High school kids don't need to throw the best javelin that was ever built. They don't need to pay $1,000 to throw the javelin, but you want a javelin that's going to last. You want a javelin that's legal. So if you just bring in, I won't say any names, but you bring in certain javelins, they may not be legal. And so, even if you pay $200, $300 for a javelin, you expect it to be legal.
Absolutely.
Right? So there's that balance. There's a lot of challenges being in an On Track because, with the internet and with larger entities out there that can beat you on price, and coaches want the best price, obviously, because they have a very limited budget. So you're trying to find that balance, all the time, of making sure you match the quality and the workmanship of the product to what that coach needs. And sometimes it works out great. Sometimes it's real frustrating because you get beat just because of price. Sometimes you've got a great customer and then all of a sudden that coach moves on and you lose, and you got to convince somebody and they don't believe you and they buy some lesser quality equipment and they're like, man, why did I do that? You see them in a show and they go, man, I really messed that up. I shouldn't have bought that. It's not working out for me. But by the time they're ready to buy that again, they're gone. So you go through it. So there's all those challenges, but luckily for me, once again, I've hooked up with the guy, Steve, that and everybody says it, but you actually walk the walk and not just talk it. And quality, taking care of people is really important, and there's a lot of BS out there. You can say a lot of things to people, but I think, when the rubber meets the road, if you take care of your customer, if you give them actual, good information, a lot of coaches call up and they go, I got this kid, he's jumping 13 feet, but we got to get him on 15-foot poles. Well, that's not the right thing. It's not the right thing for the kid. And so can you help the guy understand that? Convince him, help teach him. So that's a fun thing to do, right? And like the javelin. And somebody wants a 90% rim weight disc because they read that somebody threw that real far,
Right.
and their kid's throwing 100 feet. Well, that's not going to work for your kid. And you explain why. I've got the background to not just BS them, but to tell them exactly why and get the right discus that not only can they afford, but the kid will have more success with. So if you can find those kinds of things, be innovative, work with people that care, that really do care, and try to do it the right way. And luckily I've landed there once again. OnTrack could have gone in a lot of different directions. And I've been around long enough that I wouldn't put up with being with a company that didn't do that, So it's still a challenge because pricing is so important, and the internet makes it harder. But there's still a place out there for people, and if you're a distance coach and you're the best distance coach in the world, but you've never coached the vault, how are you going to know what pole do I really need? I got my kid, he's doing this. What do I go to? What's the next pole? And it's not just automatic, because maybe the kid's 5 feet 6 inches tall, maybe 6'4". And that's going to influence what pole you really should go to, so as an example. So, you're just trying to help those things out. And then you got to follow up, because things don't go right in this world, right? Things get broken in shipping. Things get shipped wrong from you guys, from us. Those problems happen. And, and so if you're upfront, well, that's my mistake, that's on me, we'll fix it. You fix it, then you can build that reputation. You take care of some coaches, and pretty soon you build that salesman referral list that you need. And so people come back to say, hey, Dan's my man, he's going to take care of me. I don't care what it costs. And then you get all the new guys, you got to convince them of that. So it's a good challenge. It's a fun challenge. But like you said, I mean, you said it exactly the way. For me, it really is helping the sport, helping kids. Just like I said, I've got a girl coming in from a good high school, but they don't care about the vault. So she had one pole to vault on. One pole. I mean, what can you can't be a vaulter, which is one pole. It's either too big or too small. Eventually,
you can't be a good vaulter. You're still a vaulter, absolutely.
So for me, if I had known that, I would like to try to help that coach. Saying, no, you need to build, if you want to have vaulters, you need to build that up a little bit. Here's what you got to do. Here's a series to help you. So that's kind of what it's been like. Does that answer your question? Absolutely.
Yeah. And what really struck me there, Dan, I'm speaking to the coaches who are listening right now. We have a dealer network built out. So I talk to salespeople all across this country. What Dan just said there is really important. If you're looking for who to purchase track and field equipment from, find you a sales professional. That's different than a salesman, by the way. The salesman conjures up the used car salesman, the snake oil salesman. A sales professional serves their customers. Find you a sales professional that will try to talk you out of buying something. That's key to me. When I hear a sales professional like Dan say that, my ears perk up and it's like, oh, yeah, this is a person you can trust. Because the person who doesn't have your best interest at heart says, oh, you want that 90% rim weight discus for your 100-foot thrower? Sure. You want your money. Have you ever heard that? It's your money.
Yeah.
Well, it is your money. And we know how limited and how important that money is to you, whether you're a mom buying that for your kids, so your own personal money, or you're a coach taking it out of your budget that they don't give you enough of. Find you a sales professional that will try to talk you out of something like, hey, I'd rather you take that. I'm just going to make up numbers. Instead of paying $700, $800, whatever that discus might be, I'd rather you buy 5 $100 discuses that are in this room weight. And now you're getting more reps for that kid. And that person's going to go from 100 to 110, 120, 130. And you know what? When they get to 180, 190, maybe,
Right.
maybe they
Right.
need to throw that. But guess what? Not everybody needs to throw that either, by the way. Find that person, and that's the person that's going to sell you your big ticket items, your pole vault pits, your hurdles, your cages, with an honest and fair deal. They got your best interest at heart. They're not trying to get every single dollar out of your budget. They're there to help you make your budget work for you. Anytime you hear a sales professional say that, your ears should perk up and be like, oh, I should at least talk to this person. Like, this person is some trustworthy person. The salesman, the saleswoman that just says, hey, it's your money. You want that? Sure, I'll sell it to you. They got their best interest at heart at that point. And so, Dan, I just appreciate the way you conduct business. It makes it when my whole world is in the ecosystem of coaches. So I have coaches all the time. Well, who should I buy from? Where should I get this, etc. It's always comforting. It's a Rolodex of people like yourself that it's like, oh, hey, you want to know. First of all, Dan, you have such an amazing background in the manufacturing side of it. You have a whole different education and experience level that 99.9% of all salespeople in our world, in the track and field equipment world, aren't ever going to be able to touch. So I just love, being able to give a coach to you to work with, because it's like, oh, you've got, heckin', like, you and I have talked javelins before. It's like, oh yeah, you are light years ahead of me, my friend. And I know decent amount because it happens right across that door, but you've had your hands in the muck doing it. That's, you can't pay for that education. But then to know that even against your best interest, selling that $900 discus versus the selling, $100 discus, that you will do that for your coaches, for your clients, for your customers. That is what builds. And that's why you built the reputation that you have built today. Those people who have worked with you, I've talked to a lot of those coaches before, and they're like, oh yeah, Dan's the man. That's the guy. That's who I go to. That's my guy. I don't have to worry about a lot of things because I have Dan on my team, on my staff, almost, if you will. Dan's my equipment manager, if you will. That is just what makes life a lot easier, not only for myself, ourselves here as a manufacturer, having you represent Gill Athletics equipment out there, but also as coaches out there. It's just, you've got so much going on, Coach. Recruiting, coaching, paperwork, NIL, transfer portal, etc. It's your own lives. You have your own families and passions and charities. Here's a way to have some comfort in your decisions. Like I said, it's almost like he's on your staff here. So Dan, I'm just so thankful for that posture that you have in your salesmanship, and you're a true sales professional out there.
Thank you. Appreciate that, man. Cool.
Dan, man, we went around the world. We learned something. How important is it to go to someone and be like, hey man, you need to hire me? Like, I love that. There's some gumption there, if you will. And I love that, because if you don't, well, sometimes people don't know they should be hiring you. So I love that, that never fight attitude. I love that. Thank goodness the snow melted and it rained and that river flooded, because it seemed very picturesque before that. And you're saying you're looking down, you see salmon swimming. Come on, who doesn't want that? Thank goodness you had to move. And there was this crazy 2x4 with a steel pole sitting in your alley, man. Because I think for
sometimes my wife isn't sure that.
Yeah, I bet. But I do wonder sometimes, obviously that was kind of a catalyst to build this amazing career in life that you've had up to this point. And what's awesome is that life and career is continuing on, my friend. Today's not the end by any means. You have many, many years ahead of you serving coaches around the country. But I think a guy like you, I think you were put on this earth for the vault in some form or fashion, whether it's coaching, manufacturing, selling, etc. I think even if you would have stayed in that crazy, forest river area, and maybe even if that high school didn't have vaulting, I think vaulting still would have found you. Whether you would have seen it on TV one day as a 24-year-old, like, oh man, that's kind of a cool event, I should just try that. I think it was no stopping you and the vault coming together, and it's made for a great life with some great adventures and some great people that you've had in your network, in your circle, and you have become one of those great people for other people, man. So I'm just so grateful and so thankful for what you have done, what you continue to do now, and what you will do here in the next few years as well as you continue on in your career.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. It means a lot to me.
Absolutely. And thank you for being here, man. I told you this would be a fun one. We'd have a kind of a mashup of a whole bunch of things. And I'm willing to bet there's at least 20 more stories still hidden back there that I wasn't able to pull out. We might have to
Correct.
revisit this one day and do it all over again. But so grateful that you would join us here on the Guild Connections podcast as we uplift and honor coaches from around the country, including coaches like this that have what is just a unique background, man. I love it, especially as a manufacturer at heart. I just absolutely love it. So thanks for being here. Check us out next week. We'll do it all over again. Have a great week, everybody.